Welcome back to the board. Today, two of the strongest Shogi engines face off, AobaZero _W4718_N_P800 moving first, as sent, against Dewar_condenser. Let's follow it quietly, move by move. Cent pushes the pawn to 26. Goat pushes the pawn to 84. Cent pushes the pawn to 25. Goat pushes the pawn to 85. Cent plays the gold to 78, an inaccuracy that now clearly favors Cent, and the engine preferred the pawn to 96 instead. Goat plays the gold to 32. Cent brings their silver up to 38. Goat brings their silver up to 72. Cent moves their king to 58. And Goat mirrors, bringing their king to 52. Cent pushes the pawn to 24. Goat's pawn captures the pawn on 24. Cent's rook captures the pawn on 24. Goat brings a pawn into play on 23. Cent swings the rook over to 26. Goat pushes the pawn to 34. Cent pushes the pawn to 96. Goat pushes the pawn to 64. Cent pushes the pawn to 76. Goat pushes the pawn to 74. Cent swings the rook over to 36. And Goat plays the silver to 63. Cent's rook takes the pawn on 34. Goat's bishop captures the bishop on 88, promoting to a horse. Cent's silver captures the horse on 88. Goat drops a knight to 33. Cent pushes the pawn to 16, an inaccuracy when the engine preferred dropping a bishop on 55, and the game now clearly favors Cent. Goat plays the silver to 42. And now Cent brings the knight to 77. Goat brings the gold to 72. Cent pushes the pawn to 15. Goat brings the knight to 73. Cent swings the rook over to 36. Goat pushes the pawn to 54. Cent plays the knight to 17. Goat brings the gold to 22. Cent moves their rook to 26. Goat drops a bishop to 44. Cent swings the rook to 36. Goat pushes the pawn to 86. Cent pushes the pawn to 75. Goat captures the pawn on 87 with the pawn, promoting it to a token. Cent's silver captures the token on 87. Goat's pawn captures the pawn on 75. Cent moves the king to 48, completing a Yagura-style castle around it. Goat drops a pawn on 88. Cent advances the silver to 86. And Goat plays the pawn to 89, promoting to a token. Cent drops a pawn on 83. Goat's gold captures the pawn on 83. Cent's silver then captures the pawn on 75. Goat drops a token to 79, a blunder that clearly favors Cent, and the engine preferred dropping a pawn on 74 instead. Cent drops a pawn on 84. Goat's gold takes the pawn on 84. Cent's silver takes the gold on 84. Goat's rook takes the silver on 84. Cent drops a pawn on 85. Goat swings the rook over to 74. Cent drops a pawn on 75. Goat's rook takes the pawn on 75. Cent drops a bishop on 86, but Goat is clearly on top now. Goat's token captures the gold on 78. Cent's bishop captures the rook on 75. Goat's token captures the knight on 77, a blunder which the engine preferred drops a silver on 72 instead, and the game now clearly favors Goat. Cent's bishop moves to 66. Goat's bishop captures the bishop on 66. Cent's rook captures the bishop on 66, swinging the rook across in a ranging rook approach. Goat drops a gold on 72, a blunder that clearly favors Cent, the engine preferred dropping a bishop on 44. Cent drops a rook on 81. Goat drops a pawn on 71. Cent pushes their pawn to 84, but goat is clearly on top now. Goat drops a pawn on 82, a blunder the engine thought was worse than dropping a bishop on 75, but goat is still clearly on top. Cent drops a gold on 83. Goat's pawn on 84 takes the gold on 83. Cent's pawn on 83 captures the pawn on 83, promoting to a token. Goat drops a bishop on 44, a blunder, and the engine preferred the gold capturing the token on 83 instead, but the game now clearly favors goat. Cent's token captures the gold on 72. Goat silver captures the token on 72. Cent's rook captures the lance on 91, promoting to a dragon. Goat's bishop captures the rook on 66. It's a blunder, as the engine preferred the king to 41, and the game now clearly favors goat. Cent's pawn captures the bishop on 66. Goat drops a rook on 88 with check, a blunder that clearly favors Cent, as the engine preferred a token to 67 instead. Cent drops a lance on 58. Goat plays the token to 68, a blunder that clearly favors goat, the engine preferred the token to 67 instead. Cent's dragon captures the pawn on 71, but goat is clearly on top now. Goat drops a gold on 61, a blunder that now clearly favors goat, with the engine preferring token captures the lance on 58 instead. Cent drops a bishop on 74, with check. Goat responds by dropping a knight on 63, and is clearly on top now. Cent plays the bishop captures the knight on 63, promoting to a horse, with check. Goat silver captures the horse on 63, and goat is clearly on top now. Cent drops a bishop to 41, checking goat's king. Goat's king captures the bishop on 41, and goat is clearly on top now. Cent's dragon captures the gold on 61, checking goat's king, but goat is clearly on top now. Goat drops a silver on 51, a blunder that surprisingly makes the game now clearly favor goat, despite the engine preferring a bishop drop on 51, all while goat's king is safe in their Yagura-style castle. Cent drops a knight on 34. Goat's token captures the lance on 58, with check, and goat is clearly on top now. Cent's gold takes the token on 58. Goat's rook captures the gold on 58, promoting to a dragon with check, a move that really solidifies their ranging rook approach, and goat is clearly on top now. Cent's king takes the dragon on 58. Goat drops a bishop on 94, checking the king, goat is clearly on top. Cent drops a gold to 67, and goat is clearly on top. Goat's bishop captures the dragon on 61, and they are clearly on top now. Cent drops a rook on 81, though goat is clearly on top now. Goat plays the silver to 72, a blunder the engine preferred to avoid by dropping a bishop on 94 instead. Cent plays the rook to 88, promoting to a dragon, but goat is clearly on top now. Goat drops a bishop on 16. Cent drops a gold on 27, but goat is clearly on top now. Goat takes the knight on 34 with the bishop, and is clearly on top now. Cent brings the gold to 77. Goat drops a rook on 89, a blunder which clearly favors goat, the engine preferred the knight to 45 instead. Cent brings the dragon to 68, but goat is clearly on top now. Goat plays the rook to 39, promoting to a dragon, and is clearly on top now. Cent brings the silver up to 49. Goat now drops a knight on 55, and is clearly on top. Cent now pushes the pawn to 56. Goat now plays the bishop, capturing the pawn on 56, a blunder as the engine preferred the knight capturing the pawn on 47, promoting to a promoted knight instead. Cent plays the dragon to 59, but goat is clearly on top now and has a forced checkmate. Goat drops a gold on 67, with check, and now has a forced checkmate. Cent plays the king to 69, though goat still has a forced checkmate. Goat plays the gold, captures the gold on 77, a blunder, as the engine preferred the dragon captures the silver on 49 instead, though goat still has a forced checkmate. Cent plays the dragon to 48, but goat still has a forced checkmate. Goat plays the dragon, captures the dragon on 48, and goat still has a forced checkmate. Cent silver captures the dragon on 48, but goat still has a forced checkmate. Goat drops a gold on 68, checking Cent's king, and the balance swings towards goat. And there it is, Dewar_condenser takes the game. Thank you for sitting with me at the board. I'll see you at the next one.